They found him slumped at the base of the grave, one hand still holding the stems of crushed wild flowers. The other pressed gently to the name carved in crumbling stone. Lieutenant J. Moore, USMC Kia, 1968. It had rained the night before, and his coat was damp from the grass, his hat blown a few feet off by the wind. He was alone. No one was there to see the way his chest rose for the last time, or the quiet way his eyes finally closed. The coroner thought he was homeless. The cops guessed he was just another lost soul wandering a forgotten place. It wasn't until they unzipped the jacket and found the faded envelope tucked inside, addressed not to a person, but to a unit designation, that anything started to shift. And when the Pentagon operator picked up the phone 3 days later, asked the responding officer to repeat the coordinates of the grave, and then fell silent on the line it began. So before we go further, let us know where you're watching from. And if you believe no soldier should ever be remembered by accident, like and subscribe, because this story starts with a man everyone forgot and ends with a salute that shook Arlington itself. His name was Ray Navarro. Most knew him as the quiet janitor at Westport High khaki uniform wireframe glasses, a limp that slowed him down just enough to be ignored. He swept the halls between lunch periods, fixed broken chairs, replaced chalk trays no one else noticed. Teachers thought he was strange. Students thought he was invisible. And the vice principal once asked if he'd ever considered retiring for safety reasons. Rye just nodded and kept wiping down the windows. But every Sunday morning before church bells rang, and while most of the town still slept, Rye would drive 15 poisement out toward Route 19 and pull into the cemetery next to the old truck stop. The gate creaked when it opened, but he always closed it gently behind him. He never brought anyone, never posted online. No selfies, no hashtags, just a man with a quiet gait, carrying a small bouquet, usually wild marigolds or dandelions, to a grave no one else ever visited. The headstone was leaning slightly half-choked by moss, and the name had started to blur beneath decades of acid rain. But Rye always cleared the vines brushed off the top soil with his sleeve, and spoke the same 6 words. "You're not forgotten. Not this week." That was it. Then he'd sit nearby for a while, sometimes scribbling in a worn leather notebook, sometimes just watching the trees move in the wind like ghosts remembering their own names. What he never said, what no one knew, was that Rye had never met Lieutenant Moore. He had stumbled across the grave by accident 10 years ago while looking for his cousin's marker. He remembered seeing the name, the rank, the silence around it. It didn't sit right with him. A fallen Marine with no flowers, no flag, no visitors. Not while Ray Navarro still had breath in his chest. And so the ritual began every week. No exceptions. Not even after his stroke. Not even when the VA stopped returning his calls. The kids at school never asked. Why would they? To them he was background noise, a fixture, a mop, and a name tag. But that changed the day a jogger happened to pass the cemetery, Gate paused to catch his breath, and saw Ray kneeling in the mud, pressing something to the headstone like a blessing. The jogger took a picture, not out of malice, just curiosity. "Man leaves flowers at same forgotten grave for 10 years," the post read. It went viral before Rye even made it home that morning. He didn't even know what going viral meant. He still used a flip phone and paid bills in person at the post office. But someone else saw that picture, someone in uniform, someone who had known more. And by the time they traced the photo to the cemetery, and from the cemetery to the town, and from the town to the school, Ray Navarro had already collapsed at the base of the grave flowers, in hand peace in his chest. The VA nurse later said he was just a lonely old man with stories, not a real soldier. But when the Pentagon opened the folder he'd carried in his coat, the one marked Ollassified Tobe opened only in the event of death. What they found made the Joint Chiefs sit up straighter. Inside his full-service record, redacted in places. 2 bronze stars, 1 silver, a signed commendation from a general who disappeared in country in '74. And at the bottom, a single note in Ray's handwriting. I didn't save him, but I never forgot him. That's where this begins, with silence and remembrance and a grave. The world almost let go. They didn't say much at first, just stood on my porch in full-dress blues, like a storm that had learned how to wear silence. I've been back from the cemetery, maybe 20 minutes, boots, still damp coffee, just starting to cool when the black sedan pulled up engine, humming too quiet for the neighborhood, and 2 Marines stepped out. Not young recruits, not clipboard tights, but senior brass, the kind whose collars shine without needing to move. I opened the door slow, still holding the mug in one hand. And I'll admit it. My stomach twisted in a way I hadn't felt since Southeast Asia, when choppers used to rattle the bones before you ever saw them. Mr. Navarro, the taller one, asked though he already knew. I nodded. Sir, he said, with a tone like he'd been practicing it for someone he never thought he'd meet. We'd like to talk about Lieutenant Moore. That name of God. Hearing it out loud after all those years hit like a weight through the chest. I didn't say anything, just stepped aside and let them in. Because when Marines show up at your door 50 years late, you don't ask questions, you brace. The shorter one, older with a scar that split his left eyebrow, pulled out a leather folder the moment he sat down at my kitchen table. It looked heavy, not just with paper, but with everything paper tried to carry, but never could. We saw the photo, he said. The one of you at the grave. I set my mug down without drinking. Didn't know anyone was watching, I muttered. You weren't supposed to, the tall one said. But someone did, and someone recognized the name on that stone. Then the scarred one opened the folder, turned it toward me, and I swear my breath caught. A black and white shot stared up at me. Our squad just outside Keon, soaked and grinning in the kind of way you only smile when you've lived through something you shouldn't. Moore stood in the center, hand on my shoulder helmet, tilted back as if to say, "We made it another day." Next to the photo was a yellowed page with my service number. The one I never told anyone after I came home, and a sealed combination I hadn't seen since it was handed to me on the tarmac. Have crumpled in a plastic envelope that told me to never show anyone. Sir, the older Marine said, tapping the file, do you understand what this is? I didn't answer. I was too busy looking at the crease in the paper where my own handwriting showed faintly through the back. He died alone. You shouldn't be remembered that way. That's what I wrote. That's what I left in the folder the day I walked away from everything. The medals, the benefits, the forced parades and empty speeches. I wasn't a hero, but more carried us every damn time. When the radios cut out, when the evac was late, when the jungle felt like it was swallowing us whole, he stood straight always until that last ambush. I shook my head slowly, trying to make sense of the moment. Why now? I finally asked. Because he remembered the tall Marines said, not missing a beat. And the Corps doesn't forget the ones who keep watch, even when no one's left to see it. Turns out Moore had no surviving family, no next of kin. This case had gone cold, his legacy scattered across old microfilm and redacted summaries until someone me decided to kneel beside that grave every Sunday and say 6 words that no one else ever had. The photo online triggered an internal ping, a facial recognition tag. And within hours, they weren't just looking at Moore's grave. They were looking at my old file, my name, my silence. My decision to vanish instead of collect honors that belong to ghosts, not men. You've been off the grid a long time, the scarred Marine said, flipping to a document stamped confidential deferred honors. We'd like to change that, with your permission. I almost laughed. I didn't do anything but sit on some grass. The tall one leaned forward, voice like gravel. You sat beside a fallen Marine for 10 years. That's more than some do for the living. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. We sat there in the soft hum of my kitchen fan, the old clock ticking like a metronome on memory. Finally, the scar once stood. There's a ceremony, he said. We'd like you to be there for more for yourself. I watched them go, boots clicking gently down my front steps, their car disappearing without a sound. And when I turned back inside, when I saw that file still sitting open on the table with that black and white photo of a young man's hand resting on my shoulder like it never left, I did something I hadn't done in years. I saluted not to the men, not to the flag, but to the memory that somehow made it home. I didn't expect the bagpipes, didn't expect the line of Marines and dress blues stretching down the hill like sentinels carved from silence. Didn't expect the riderless horse or the rifle team or the goddamn drone camera circling like some vulture trying to make Legacy digestible in 4K. But they told me to wear my jacket, the old one, with the torn cuff and the buttons I'd sewn back myself in '73, and to meet them just past sunrise at Hillrest National. I almost didn't go. I sat in the truck for 10 whole minutes, watching fog roll over the desoaked grass, wondering if Moore would have laughed at the whole thing. But when I stepped out and felt the weight of the morning settle across my shoulders, I knew this wasn't about me. They'd cleaned the grave, leveled it, polished it, re-engraved the name. James M. Moore, 1st, LTUSMC, 1944 to 1968, never forgotten. A fresh flag flew beside it, tucked in tight, and a wreath sat like a crown made of memory and apology. But what broke me wasn't any of that. It was the envelope sitting on top of the headstone sealed with wax, my own handwriting staring back at me. You're not forgotten. Not this week. One of the officers, a full bird colonel this time, handed it to me and said, We recovered this during restoration. Thought you should have it back. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I knew what it said. I'd written versions of that same letter for 10 years. A decade of guilt and quiet Sundays. A decade of telling a dead man I was sorry for not dragging him out of that blast zone, for making it to the chopper when he didn't, for surviving when someone else didn't get the choice. But now there were people standing around who had never even met Moore. Recruits officers, local high school kids holding flags they barely knew how to fold. And somehow, they all looked at that grave like it was sacred. A general I'd only seen once, back in '71, when he visited Daong, stepped forward and offered me a salute so crisp it felt like it sliced the wind. Mr. Navarro, he said, Lieutenant Moore's final citation will list you as the custodian of record. Your flowers were proof of continued honors under Title 10. This is your ceremony, too. I wanted to tell him no, that I didn't want a headline. Didn't want my name printed in gold or spoken over a loudspeaker. But the moment I opened my mouth, something else happened. A young man in civilian clothes walked up, maybe 20, nervous and stiff-backed. He had a cane, cheap aluminum, not military issue, and a patch on his shoulder that said ROC. Sir, he said, voice cracking. My dad served with Lieutenant Moore. He said if I ever got the chance to thank the man who remembered him. He didn't finish the sentence. He just handed me a small folded paper. Inside was a photo I'd never seen. Me and Moore sitting on sandbags, grinning with our boots off socks drying in the sun. The kind of moment the war tries to erase, but never fully can. I didn't even know this picture existed. I whispered. The kid just nodded. We scanned his footlocker after he died. Found it with your name written on the back. He called you the Watchman. I didn't know what to say to that. Never thought anyone call me anything but Ray. But then the bugler played taps, and I stood like I'd been lit from the inside. Not because of pride, because of duty, because Moore deserved more than memory. He deserved noise music honor. Voices raised not in sorrow, but in reverence. The rifle team fired 3 vols, each crack a punctuation mark in a sentence none of us were brave enough to finish. And then they folded the flak slow methodical, the way Marines do when they want the world to feel each crease, like a wound healed over time. The colonel handed it to me. He had no next of kin. You're it now. I didn't argue. I just took it, felt its weight, and nodded. After the ceremony, they unveiled the new marker. Beneath Moore's name was a second line carved in stone in honor of Raymond Navarro for 10 years of unsung. I didn't cry. Not then. Not until I saw a group of young kids, 10, maybe 11, walking the path with their teacher, each carrying a wild flower. One by one, they placed them gently at Moore's grave. Not because they knew him, but because someone told them a story about a man who never forgot. Now they wouldn't either. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the shadow box finally open. The metals still gleamed untouched by time. I pinned Moore's photo inside next to my own, and I wrote one last note in the notebook I'd carried all these years. Just one sentence. The watch ends, but the memory stands. Then I closed it, placed it on the window so, and watched the wind move through the trees, like a whisper passing through generations. I didn't need to return next Sunday. Someone else would. Because stories like his, like ours, don't end in silence. They echo.